I remember the exact moment when my world shattered. It was late afternoon in Los Angeles, the golden light streaming through the curtains of our cozy house in Silver Lake. It was one of those beautiful autumn days when the air was crisp, but the warmth of the sun still kissed your skin. I had just come home from work, carrying a bouquet of fresh lilies for the dining table. I'd always liked filling our home with little touches of beauty, things that made it feel like a sanctuary. But that day it was anything but. I should have known something was wrong. There had been signs, subtle at first, the kind you brush off when you're desperately clinging to the belief that your marriage is still solid. John had been distant for months, longer hours at the office, more business trips, late-night phone calls that ended as soon as I walked into the room. But I told myself it was work. He was a lawyer after all. Busy, important. And we were in Los Angeles where everyone was always chasing something. I convinced myself it was just a phase, that he'd snap out of it, that we'd find our way back to each other like we always did. But that day, everything unraveled. I was setting the flowers on the table when his phone buzzed on the counter. Normally, I wouldn't have even looked, but something in my gut told me to. I ignored the voice in my head that screamed at me to stop, and I picked it up. That's when I saw the text. It was from her. A woman I didn't know. "Last night was amazing. I miss you already. Can't wait until you're back." My heart stopped. I read it again, trying to convince myself that there was some logical explanation, that it was a misunderstanding. But deep down I knew. My stomach churned, and my hands began to shake as I scrolled up through their conversation. The messages went back weeks. Pictures. Plans. Words of affection and desire that I hadn't heard from him in what felt like forever. It was like being punched in the gut over and over again. My vision blurred with tears as I stumbled back, feeling the walls close in around me. How long had this been going on? How many times had I ignored the signs, choosing instead to believe that we were just going through a rough patch? I don't remember how long I stood there, staring at the screen in disbelief. Time seemed to freeze, the world outside moving on while mine was collapsing. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if I couldn't get enough oxygen. I felt like I was drowning. I heard the front door open, and there he was, standing in the doorway, his usual confident smile faltering the moment he saw my face. "Sarah," he said cautiously, his eyes flicking from me to his phone. He knew. In that instant he knew I had seen everything. "Who is she?" My voice was barely a whisper, trembling with the weight of 1,000 unasked questions. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his eyes wide, his mouth opening and closing like he was searching for words but couldn't find them. I could see the guilt written all over his face, the shame that he hadn't been able to hide anymore. And yet, a part of me still hoped that there was some explanation that would make this all go away. But then he spoke. She's someone I've been seeing." I felt the words hit me like a physical blow. My knees went weak, and I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling. "Seeing," I repeated, as if saying it out loud would somehow make it less real. But it didn't. It only made the pain sharper, more tangible. "How long?" I managed to choke out, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "About 6 months," he said quietly, as if saying it any louder would make it worse. "It's not what you think, Sarah. It's complicated." Complicated. That word. As if it could explain away the betrayal, the nights he spent with her while I sat at home wondering why he wasn't answering my calls. As if it could erase the lies, the deceit, the way he had looked me in the eye every day and pretended that we were still us. 6 months. My voice cracked and I could feel the tears spilling over, hot and angry. "You've been lying to me for 6 months, John. Do you even realize what you've done?" "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, taking a step toward me, but I backed away, holding up my hand to stop him. I couldn't stand the thought of him touching me, not now. Not after everything. "Don't," I warned, my voice shaking with anger and heartbreak. "Don't you dare come near me." "I'm sorry, Sarah," he whispered, and for a second, I saw the man I had fallen in love with, the man who had promised me forever. But that man was gone, replaced by a stranger I didn't recognize. It just happened. I didn't plan for any of this. I laughed, but it was hollow, bitter. "It just happened? You don't just happen to cheat on your wife, John. You made a choice. Every time you went to her, every time you lied to me, you chose her over us." His face crumpled, and for a moment I thought I saw regret. But it was too late for regret. Too late for apologies. The damage was done and there was no going back. What happens now? I asked, though I wasn't sure if I even cared about the answer. I already knew what was coming. I could feel it, the cold, empty space where my heart used to be. I don't know, he admitted. I didn't want it to end like this. I never wanted to lose you. But you did, I said, my voice breaking. You lost me the moment you chose her. Silence hung between us, thick and heavy. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the room. And I realized that everything was different. Nothing would ever be the same again. I'll leave, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll give you space. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I was too numb, too broken to even think about what came next. All I knew was that the life we had built together, the life I thought was unshakable, had crumbled in an instant. And there was no putting it back together. As he turned and walked out the door, I felt a wave of despair wash over me. This was it. The end of us. The end of everything I thought I knew. I sank to the floor, the bouquet of lilies still clutched in my hands. They were beautiful, fragile, their petals soft against my skin. But they were dying just like us. Just like me. And in that moment I realized that I had lost more than just my husband. I had lost myself. The house was eerily silent after John left. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed through the hallways, as if marking the final chapter of our story. I sat there on the cold hardwood floor, surrounded by the flowers I had once thought would brighten our home, now scattered and crushed, much like my heart. I tried to cry, to let the emotion flood out of me, but I was empty, numb. It felt like I had been hollowed out, like the pain had drained me of everything that made me me. How could it have come to this? How could the man I had loved for so many years, the man I had built a life with, look me in the eyes and tell me that he had been with someone else for 6 months? How could he stand there and say that he didn't want to lose me, when all the while he had been slipping away? My phone buzzed beside me. For a moment I considered ignoring it. What could possibly matter right now? But the vibration was persistent, and when I finally glanced at the screen, I saw it was a text from my best friend, Emily. Hey babe, drinks tonight? It's been a while. Of course Emily didn't know. No one knew. I hadn't told a soul about the doubts that had been creeping into my mind for months, the uneasy feeling in my gut that something was wrong. I had been too ashamed to admit it, even to myself. I didn't want anyone to know that my perfect marriage was crumbling, that the love story everyone had admired for years was, in reality, a carefully constructed facade. I debated whether or not to reply. How could I go out and pretend everything was fine when my entire life had just fallen apart? But the alternative, sitting alone in this house that no longer felt like home, seemed unbearable. So I texted back. Yeah, sure. I need it. Within the hour I was out the door. The drive through the Los Angeles streets felt surreal. The sun had set, and the city was alive with its usual hum. Cars honking, lights flashing, people going about their lives. How could everything look so normal when my world had completely collapsed? I arrived at the bar we always went to, a little place tucked away on a quiet street in Silver Lake. It had always been our escape, our little corner of the city where we could unwind and forget about the chaos of the outside world. But tonight it felt different. Everything felt different. I spotted Emily at a table near the window, her dark hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She waved at me excitedly, her face lighting up with that infectious smile she always had. God, she had no idea. Sarah, she called as I approached. It's about time. I feel like I haven't seen you in ages. I forced a smile, though it felt like a mask, something foreign and unnatural on my face. Yeah, it's been a crazy few weeks. Emily raised an eyebrow. You okay? You look, I don't know, off. I hesitated, my eyes darting down to the drink she'd already ordered for me. A glass of white wine, my usual. How could I even begin to explain what had just happened? How could I say the words out loud without completely falling apart? But I didn't need to say anything. Emily's smile faded as she leaned in, her eyes narrowing in concern. Sarah, what's going on? And just like that, the floodgates opened. I told her everything. The distance, the late nights, the texts I found, the other woman. I could see the shock in her eyes as I recounted every painful detail, her hand reaching across the table to grasp mine as my voice cracked and tears finally spilled over. I had been holding it in for so long, trying to convince myself that it wasn't real, that somehow it would all work out. But now, sitting here with my best friend, I couldn't hide from the truth anymore. "I don't know what to do," I whispered, wiping at my eyes with the back of my hand. "I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore." Emily squeezed my hand tightly, her voice soft but fierce. "You're Sarah. You're strong and you're going to get through this. I know it feels like the end of the world right now, but it's not. He doesn't get to take everything from you." "But he already has," I replied, my voice barely audible. "He's taken everything. My trust, my love, our future. I don't know how to move forward." For a moment, Emily was silent, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and anger. "You move forward one step at a time. And you do it without him. He doesn't deserve you, Sarah. You deserve so much more than this." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that there was a future for me beyond this heartbreak, that I could somehow rebuild my life without John. But right now it all felt too overwhelming, too raw. Every thought, every memory was tainted by his betrayal. Every corner of our house, every piece of furniture, every photograph hanging on the wall. It all reminded me of him, of the life we had built together and the lies that had been woven into it. The next few hours passed in a blur of wine and conversation, Emily doing her best to distract me with stories and gossip, trying to make me laugh. And for brief moments I did. But as soon as there was a lull, the pain came rushing back, sharper and more unbearable than before. Eventually I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to leave, to be alone with my thoughts. Emily offered to come with me, to stay the night, but I declined. I didn't want company. I didn't want sympathy. I just wanted to crawl into bed and disappear. Driving home, the city lights flickered by in a blur. I found myself driving aimlessly through the streets of Los Angeles, winding through neighborhoods I barely recognized. I wasn't ready to go back to that house. The house where we had spent so many years together, where every room echoed with memories of us. Memories that now felt like ghosts haunting me. I pulled over to the side of the road, somewhere near Griffith Park, and stared out at the city below. The lights stretched out for miles, glittering against the dark night sky. From here it all looked so peaceful, so perfect. But I knew better. I knew that behind those lights, behind those windows, there were people just like me. People whose lives weren't as perfect as they seemed. People who were hurting, who were struggling to hold on. I sat there for what felt like hours, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I thought about John, about the years we had spent together, the good times and the bad. I thought about the future we had planned, the family we had talked about starting. And now there was nothing. Just an empty space where our life together used to be. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream, to break something, to let all the anger and hurt pour out of me. But all I could feel was a deep aching sadness. A sadness that felt like it would never go away. Eventually I made my way back home. The house was dark and quiet, and as soon as I walked through the door, the reality of it hit me again. John was gone, and he wasn't coming back. I wandered through the house, my fingers brushing against the walls, the furniture, the photographs. It all felt so foreign now, like a life that belonged to someone else. I found myself standing in our bedroom, staring at the bed we had shared for so many years. The bed where we had laughed, cried, loved, fought. And now it was empty. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my body heavy with exhaustion, and for the first time since John had walked out, I allowed myself to fully feel the weight of it all. The betrayal, the loss, the uncertainty of what came next. I didn't know how to move forward, didn't know if I could. But as I lay there in the darkness, I realized one thing. This was the beginning of something new. It was terrifying and it hurt like hell, but it was also a chance to start over. Without him. Without the lies. And maybe, just maybe, I could find myself again. The days that followed blurred into one long agonizing stretch of time. Mornings bled into afternoons, afternoons into nights, and I barely moved from the bed. I had turned my phone off, ignored the world outside, and simply let myself drift in and out of a hollow, numb state. I couldn't face anyone. I couldn't face myself. The house felt like a prison, each corner reminding me of the life that had been ripped away from me. Every detail of our home screamed at me. His jackets hanging by the door, the books he left on the coffee table, the scent of his cologne lingering in the air. It was unbearable, yet I couldn't bring myself to leave. It was as if the house itself was holding me hostage, refusing to let me escape the memories. Emily called every day, leaving voicemail after voicemail, begging me to answer, to come out with her, to do anything other than sit alone in that house. She didn't understand. How could she? How could anyone understand what it felt like to have the foundation of your entire life crumble in an instant? The life I had built with John, the man I had trusted more than anyone else, was gone. Torn apart by his lies, by the secret life he had been living right under my nose. I spent hours replaying everything in my mind, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when things started to go wrong. Was it something I did? Something I didn't do? Should I have noticed sooner, confronted him earlier? Or was I simply a fool for trusting him as blindly as I did? The questions circled endlessly, each one more torturous than the last. I thought of the woman, her. The one who had taken him from me, or maybe the one he had run to. I didn't even know her name, but she haunted me just the same. I pictured her, imagined her younger, prettier, more exciting, everything I wasn't anymore. And it killed me. I hated her, but more than that, I hated myself for not being enough. One afternoon, after what felt like an eternity of lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I dragged myself to the shower. The hot water poured over me, but it didn't wash away the ache in my chest. I stood there, letting the water beat down on my skin, my thoughts swirling, trying to find any scrap of clarity. What now? How was I supposed to move forward? I had always been strong, or at least I thought I was. But now I felt so weak, so utterly broken. When I finally emerged, the house was still just as silent, just as suffocating. I dried myself off, threw on the first clothes I could find, a pair of leggings and an old sweatshirt, and made my way downstairs. I had to force myself to eat something. I had barely touched food in days, the thought of it turning my stomach, but my body was screaming at me, the hunger gnawing at my insides. I opened the fridge, staring blankly at the contents, but nothing appealed to me. Instead, I grabbed a bottle of wine from the counter, pouring myself a glass and sipping it slowly, hoping the alcohol would dull the sharp edge of my pain. I carried the glass into the living room, collapsing onto the couch, my eyes falling on a framed photo of us. It was from our trip to Big Sur last year, one of those spur-of-the-moment getaways we used to love. In the photo we were smiling, arms wrapped around each other, the ocean crashing behind us. We looked so happy, so in love. But now, looking at it, I realized that even then, something must have already been broken. He had probably already met her by then. That thought sent a fresh wave of anguish through me, and I quickly turned the photo face down, unable to look at it any longer. As I sat there sipping my wine, I couldn't stop my mind from drifting back to the night I had found out. The moment I had seen that text on his phone. It had been so mundane, so normal, until it wasn't. I had thought we were past the hardest parts of our marriage, that we were solid, that we had survived the rough patches. But I had been wrong. So painfully wrong. I don't know how long I sat there, drinking glass after glass, sinking deeper into my own despair. The house was dark now, the sun having set without me even noticing. I felt completely and utterly alone, as if the walls were closing in on me. The bottle of wine was nearly empty when there was a knock at the door. At first I thought I was imagining it, too lost in my own misery to believe anyone could possibly be here. But then it came again, louder this time. I groaned, pulling myself up from the couch, my head spinning slightly from the wine. Who could it be? I hadn't spoken to anyone in days, and I certainly wasn't in the mood for company. When I opened the door, I was surprised to find Emily standing there. A look of deep concern etched across her face. "Sarah," she said softly, her eyes scanning my face as if trying to assess just how bad things were. "You didn't answer your phone." I was worried. I leaned against the doorframe, too tired to argue or send her away. "I'm fine," I lied, though we both knew it wasn't true. Emily stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, closing the door behind her. She took one look at the nearly empty wine bottle and the overturned photo on the coffee table, and her expression softened with pity. "This isn't you, Sarah," she said gently, taking the glass from my hand and setting it down. "You can't just sit here drowning yourself in wine." "What else am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I don't know how to do this, Emily. I don't know how to get over him." She wrapped her arms around me in a hug, and for the first time in days I let myself cry. Really cry. I sobbed into her shoulder, my body shaking with the force of it, all the pain I had been holding and spilling out at once. Emily didn't say anything. didn't try to offer any meaningless platitudes. She just held me, letting me fall apart in her arms. When I finally pulled away, wiping at my tear-streaked face, she sat me down on the couch and handed me a glass of water. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. "I'm here for you. Whatever you need, whenever you need it." I nodded, though the weight of her words felt overwhelming. The truth was, I didn't even know what I needed. I didn't know how to move forward, how to begin piecing my life back together. Everything felt so shattered, so far beyond repair. "I don't know how to be without him," I admitted, my voice small. "He's been my life for so long, Emily. I don't even know who I am without him." "You're still you, Sarah," Emily said firmly. "You're strong, and you're going to find yourself again. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but you will. One day you're going to wake up and it won't hurt as much. You'll start to see the cracks of light breaking through all this darkness." I wanted to believe her, but right now it felt impossible. The pain was still too raw, the wound too fresh. "I just don't understand why," I whispered, staring down at my hands. "Why wasn't I enough for him? What did I do wrong?" "You didn't do anything wrong," Emily said firmly, taking my hands in hers. "This isn't about you. This is about him and the choices he made. He's the one who betrayed you, Sarah. Not the other way around." I knew she was right logically, but it didn't make the hurt any less. It didn't stop the endless loop of thoughts running through my mind, the constant questioning of every little thing I had said or done in the past year. Could I have been more attentive? Should I have tried harder? Could I have saved our marriage if I had just seen the signs sooner? Emily stayed with me that night, refusing to leave me alone, and for that I was grateful. We didn't talk much after that. She just sat with me, watching old movies on TV and making sure I drank water instead of more wine. It was the first time in days that I didn't feel completely lost. But as the night wore on and the quiet settled around us, I couldn't help but wonder, what now? What was my life supposed to look like without John in it? How was I supposed to move forward when everything I had known, everything I had planned for, had been ripped away? I had no answers. Only the haunting silence of a life I no longer recognized. The days stretched into weeks and somehow I managed to function. Or at least I went through the motions of what functioning looked like. I returned to work, though my heart wasn't in it. I would sit at my desk, staring at the screen, barely able to focus on the tasks in front of me. My colleagues, sensing something was wrong, gave me space. I could feel their concerned glances, the whispers behind my back, but no one asked directly. Maybe they didn't know how, or maybe they didn't want to get involved. Either way, I was thankful for the silence. I couldn't bear the thought of explaining what had happened, of reliving it over and over again. At home, the house remained as cold and empty as it had the day John walked out. His things were still there, scattered like remnants of a life I no longer recognized. I hadn't touched any of it. His clothes still hung in the closet, his books still sat on the shelves, his toothbrush was still next to mine in the bathroom. I wasn't ready to let go. As much as I hated him for what he had done, for the betrayal that had torn my heart apart, part of me couldn't face the reality that he was truly gone, that we were truly over. Emily kept checking in, forcing me out of the house whenever she could. She had made it her mission to keep me from sinking too deep into my own despair, dragging me to dinners, yoga classes, even a weekend spa retreat in Malibu. But nothing seemed to reach the part of me that was still broken. I went along with it all, putting on a brave face, laughing when I was supposed to, pretending like I was moving on. But inside I was stuck. Stuck in the moment I had found that text, stuck in the moment John had admitted to the affair, stuck in the endless loop of wondering what I had done wrong. One evening, a few weeks after everything had happened, I found myself standing in front of our closet, staring at his clothes. I had avoided this for so long, telling myself I wasn't ready, that it was too soon. But now, with the silence of the house pressing in around me, I felt the urge to do something, anything, to take back some semblance of control. I reached out and touched one of his shirts, running my fingers over the fabric. It felt strange, almost foreign now, like I was touching a piece of someone I no longer knew. This was the man I had loved, the man I had shared my life with. But he wasn't mine anymore. He had chosen someone else. And now I had to choose to let him go. With trembling hands, I started pulling his clothes from the hangers, tossing them into a pile on the bed. One by one, I emptied the closet of every trace of him. The shirts, the jackets, the ties, Each piece felt like a small weight being lifted from my chest. But it also hurt, a deep, aching hurt that I couldn't quite shake. I was erasing him from our life, from my life, and yet the memories clung to me like shadows. No matter how many of his things I packed away, I couldn't escape the ghosts that lingered in every corner of the house. As I worked my way through his drawers, I found an old hoodie of his, the one he used to wear around the house on lazy Sundays, the one I used to steal when I was cold. I held it up, and for a moment I was overwhelmed by a wave of nostalgia. I could almost see him sitting on the couch laughing at something on TV. His arm draped over the back of the cushions as he looked at me with that smile, the one that made me believe everything was going to be okay. I hugged the hoodie to my chest, burying my face in the fabric. His scent was still there, faint but unmistakable. And just like that, the tears came again. I had thought I was done crying, that I had cried all the tears I could possibly cry. But I was wrong. There was always more. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor, clutching that hoodie, my body racked with sobs. The grief came in waves, crashing over me, relentless and unforgiving. It wasn't just the loss of John that I was mourning. It was the loss of the life we had built together, the future we had planned. I had pictured us growing old together, building a family, navigating the ups and downs of life hand in hand. But all of that was gone now, ripped away by his betrayal. At some point I must have fallen asleep on the floor because I woke up hours later, the room dark, the hoodie still clutched in my hands. My body ached and my head throbbed from the crying, but the emotional exhaustion was far worse. I felt drained, like there was nothing left inside of me. Nothing except the hollow ache of what once was. I stood up, my legs shaky, and tossed the hoodie onto the pile of clothes on the bed. This had to stop. I couldn't keep doing this to myself. I couldn't keep clinging to the remnants of a life that no longer existed. John had made his choice and now I had to make mine. The next morning I called a donation service to come pick up his things. It took everything in me to watch them load up the boxes and bags, to see his belongings disappear into the back of the truck. But once they were gone, I felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Emily was thrilled when I told her. "This is huge, Sarah," she said, her voice full of excitement. "You're really moving forward." I nodded, though I didn't feel as sure as she did. Was I really moving forward? Or was I just going through the motions? I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't stay stuck in the past anymore. I couldn't keep living in a house full of memories that hurt me every time I looked around. That evening, as I stood in the now half-empty closet, I realized that the house itself had become part of the problem. It was too full of us. Everywhere I looked, I saw pieces of our life together. The kitchen table where we used to have breakfast, the couch where we'd spent lazy Sunday afternoons, the bed where we had once shared dreams and promises. I couldn't stay here, not anymore. I needed a fresh start. The idea of moving felt terrifying at first. I had lived in this house for years. It was where I had built my life with John, where I had imagined our future. But now, that future no longer existed. Staying here, surrounded by all the ghosts of what had been, would only keep me trapped in a cycle of grief and pain. I started looking at apartments, something small, something just for me. I didn't need a big house anymore. I needed something new, something that wasn't tainted by the memories of the life I had lost. I scrolled through listings, imagining myself in each one. Slowly, the idea started to feel less terrifying and more freeing. This was my chance to start over, to rebuild my life on my own terms. A week later, I found the perfect place. A small apartment in Echo Park, just a few blocks from the lake. It was nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms and a little balcony that overlooked the street, but it felt right. Felt like mine. The day I signed the lease, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The move itself was bittersweet. Packing up the house was harder than I expected. As I sorted through the things John and I had accumulated over the years, I was forced to confront all the memories tied to each object. The picture frames, the souvenirs from our trips, the gifts we had given each other. I kept some things, but most of it I left behind. I didn't need reminders of a life that no longer existed. On my last night in the house, I stood in the empty living room. The walls bare, the floors echoing with the sound of my footsteps. This had been our home, the place where we had built our life together. But now it was just an empty shell. And I was ready to leave it behind. As I locked the door for the final time, I felt a strange sense of closure. This chapter of my life was over, but a new one was beginning. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. Moving into the new apartment was liberating. I filled it with things that were just mine: new furniture, new art, new memories. I didn't bring anything from the old house except the things that mattered to me, the things that represented me, not us. It was strange living alone for the first time in years, but it was also empowering. This was my space, my life, and I was in control of it. For the first few weeks, I spent a lot of time just settling in, figuring out what this new version of my life looked like. I started going to the lake in the mornings, walking the paths and letting the fresh air clear my mind. I picked up old hobbies I had forgotten about, started reading again, took up painting, a passion I had neglected for years. Slowly, I started to find pieces of myself that I had lost along the way. It wasn't easy. There were still days when the pain would hit me out of nowhere, when I would see something that reminded me of John, and the grief would wash over me all over again. But those days became less frequent. The weight on my chest grew lighter, and with time I started to feel like I could see a future for myself again, one that didn't include him. And then one day as I was walking by the lake, I realized something. I was okay. Not completely healed, not entirely free of the pain, but okay. I was standing on my own 2 feet again. I had survived. I smiled to myself, watching the sunlight dance on the water. The future was wide open, full of possibilities I hadn't even considered yet. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally moving forward. Without him. And that was enough. As the months passed, I continued to adjust to life in my new apartment, slowly embracing the solitude that had once terrified me. My routine became comforting in its simplicity. Mornings spent walking around Echo Park Lake, afternoons working from a nearby cafe, and evenings curled up with a book or catching up on shows that I had never had time for when John was around. It was strange at first how quickly I adapted to being on my own. I used to think I needed him, that our lives were so deeply intertwined that I couldn't survive without him. But the truth was, I was learning to breathe again without the weight of our past on my shoulders. The apartment itself became a kind of sanctuary. I filled it with colors and objects that made me happy. Plants in every corner, soft blankets, paintings that spoke to me in ways I hadn't realized art could. It was mine, and in creating a space that reflected me, I felt like I was rediscovering who I was outside of the roles I had played in our marriage. I was more than John's wife, more than the woman he had left behind. I was someone else now, someone stronger, someone who was slowly finding her way back to herself. But healing wasn't linear. There were still nights when I would wake up, heart pounding, drenched in the cold sweat of a dream where I saw him with her, the woman who had invaded our life like a shadow, slipping between us until there was nothing left. In those moments, the betrayal still felt fresh, like a wound that hadn't fully healed. I wondered where she was now, if they were still together, if they were happy. The thought made me sick, but I couldn't help it. No matter how much progress I made, the lingering pain of his affair was always there, hovering in the background of my mind. One evening, after one of those particularly hard days where the memories of John weighed heavier than usual, Emily showed up at my door with a bottle of wine and a determined look on her face. She'd been my rock throughout the entire ordeal, never pushing too hard, but always there when I needed her. That night, she wasn't taking no for an answer. "We're going out," she announced as soon as I opened the door, stepping past me into the apartment like she owned the place. "You've been cooped up in here for way too long, Sarah. It's time to rejoin the living." I groaned, sinking back onto the couch. "I don't know, Em. I'm not exactly in the mood for crowds." Emily rolled her eyes, planting herself in front of me with her hands on her hips. "I'm not asking, I'm telling. You need to get out of this apartment. You've been doing great, but it's time to live again. And by live, I don't mean Netflix and takeout." She wasn't wrong. I had been hiding even if I hadn't fully realized it. It was easier to stay in my bubble, to avoid the world that reminded me of everything I had lost. But maybe Emily was right. It was time to start stepping out again. "Fine," I said with a sigh, "but no crazy clubs. I'm not in the mood for loud music and flashing lights." Emily grinned, victorious. "Don't worry, I've got just the place." That night, we ended up at a small wine bar in Highland Park. It was the kind of place I would never have gone to on my own, dimly lit, cozy with jazz playing softly in the background. It was intimate but not overwhelming. Perfect for someone like me, still finding her footing in the world again. We sat at a high-top table near the back, ordering a bottle of wine and settling into easy conversation. For the first time in a long time I felt relaxed. The weight of the past didn't seem so heavy here, surrounded by strangers, sipping wine, and laughing with Emily about the ridiculous things we used to do in college. It was almost enough to make me forget. Almost. But as the night wore on, something unexpected happened. A man at the bar caught my eye. He wasn't flashy, not the type to command attention, but there was something about him. He was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and an easy smile that flashed whenever he spoke to the bartender. I tried not to stare, but it had been so long since I had noticed anyone like that, since I had allowed myself to look. Emily noticed, of course. She followed my gaze and nudged me with a grin. "He's cute," she said, leaning in conspiratorially. "You should go talk to him." I nearly choked on my wine. "What? No. Absolutely not." "Why not?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "You're single, he's clearly single. What's the harm?" "Because I'm not ready," I said quickly, my heart racing at the thought of putting myself out there again. "I can't just jump back into things like that." Emily gave me a sympathetic look. "I get it, Sarah. I do. But it's been months. You've been healing and you've done such an amazing job. You don't have to jump into anything. But you also don't have to shut yourself off from the possibility of meeting someone new, even if it's just for a conversation." I looked at the man again. He was laughing now, and the sound of it sent a strange, fluttering sensation through my chest. I hadn't felt anything like that in so long, not since John. And maybe that was the point. Maybe I did need to at least try to open myself up again, even if it scared me. Before I could talk myself out of it, I stood up. "Fine. I'll go say hi," I said, surprising myself as much as Emily. "Atta girl," she grinned, raising her glass in a mock toast as I made my way to the bar. As I approached, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Probably just a polite conversation and an awkward retreat back to my table. But when he looked up and met my eyes, something shifted. He smiled. An easy, genuine smile that immediately put me at ease. "Hi," I said, feeling suddenly shy. "I noticed you were drinking alone, and thought, maybe you could use some company." He raised his glass slightly in a toast. I'd never turned down good company. "I'm Matt, by the way." "Sarah," I replied, sliding onto the bar stool next to him. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily after that. Matt was charming but not in an over-the-top way. He was grounded, thoughtful, asking about my work and my interests without prying too much. There was no pressure, no sense that he was expecting anything from me. It was just nice. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe around a man without the weight of my past hanging over me. As the night went on, I found myself laughing more than I had in months. Matt had a dry sense of humor that matched mine perfectly, and we shared stories about life in LA, the absurdities of city life, and everything in between. It felt natural, easy in a way that I hadn't expected. And when the bar started to close, I was almost disappointed that the night was coming to an end. He walked me back to my table where Emily was waiting, a knowing smile on her face. "I'll leave you two to it," she said with a wink, gathering her things to head home. Matt turned to me, his expression warm. "I had a really great time tonight, Sarah. Maybe we could do this again sometime? Grab coffee or lunch or something." I hesitated for a moment, the familiar fear creeping back in. What if I wasn't ready? What if this was too soon, too fast? But then I looked at him, standing there with that same easy smile, and I realized something. I didn't have to know. I didn't have to have all the answers right now. I could take it one step at a time. I could just try. "I'd like that," I said finally, my heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and nerves. We exchanged numbers, and as he left, I felt something stir inside me, hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. A tiny spark of something new. Over the next few weeks, Matt and I saw each other a few times. It was slow, no pressure, just casual lunches and walks through the park. He wasn't John, and that was the best part. He wasn't trying to be. He was kind, attentive, and patient, never pushing me to open up before I was ready. And slowly I found myself beginning to trust him. One afternoon, as we sat on a bench by the lake, watching the ducks glide across the water, I felt a quiet sense of contentment. It wasn't the whirlwind romance I had once imagined for myself, but it was real. It was steady, and for the first time in a long time I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could be happy again. The wounds from John's betrayal were still there, of course. They would probably always be there, in some form, but they were healing day by day, and with Matt I was beginning to see that there was life beyond the pain. Life beyond the heartbreak. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I was ready to live it.